Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking into something, well, really quite crucial for understanding our online world. How researchers actually get their hands on data from digital platforms.
Yeah, it's a landscape that feels like it's shifting under our feet constantly.
Exactly. And it throws up some real challenges, but maybe some opportunities too for anyone curious about how we interact online.
Definitely. And we're going to dig into the experiences of researchers who are right in the thick of it in what some are calling the post API age. We're drawing on a recent study that surveyed, I think, 180 researchers.
That's right, 180 researchers surveyed, plus they did these really in-depth interviews with 19 of them.
So it gives us a really solid kind of ground level view of what's actually happening.
Yeah, a good mix of breadth and depth. So what we want to do today is unpack the hurdles, the roadblocks these researchers are facing, and, the sometimes surprising ways they're trying to work around them.
And hopefully shed some light on platform transparency or maybe the lack of it and what it all means for, well, for understanding online life going forward.
Okay, so let's start with these terms. Post-API age, then post-API age. Sounds like quite the evolution. What's the story there?
Okay, so the post-API age, that refers to the recent past, maybe the last couple of years, where the big platforms, think Twitter, now X, and Meta, really started restricting or just getting rid of free access to their APIs.
APIs being the application programming interfaces, right? Like the doorway for data.
Exactly, the digital doorway. So
No.
Twitter ended its free academic API in 2023. That was a big one. And then Meta shutting down CrowdTangle this year, 2024, which was honestly a huge tool for tracking public stuff on Facebook and Instagram.
Right, so access got much tighter. That's the post-API age.
Yeah, basically the doors slammed shut for a lot of easy, large-scale data access for researchers. It became much, much harder.
Okay, so then what shifts us into this post-API age? Sounds like maybe something pushed back.
Well, the main driver for that term, and maybe some optimism, is the EU's Digital Services Act, the DSA.
Ah, okay. Regulation stepping in.
Right. It came into effect in 2023, and it specifically has rules requiring data access for researchers from the really big players, the very large online platforms, VLOPs, and search engines, VLOCs.
And what kind of data access are we talking about?
Well, Article 40.12 covers publicly available data, but there's also Article 40.4, which is potentially huge. It could allow vetted researchers access to even non-public data under strict conditions.
Wow. Okay.
So the post-post idea is that regulation, specifically the DSA, is trying to pry those doors back open at least a bit.
But I get the sense from the study that the reality on the ground maybe isn't quite living up to that promise yet.
That's exactly what the study digs into. Are platforms really providing the access the DSA mandates? In practice, they talk to all these researchers to get their firsthand accounts.
And it sounds like just applying, just getting your foot in the door was a massive obstacle for a lot of people. The survey showed many didn't even apply.
Yeah, quite a few. And the reasons were varied. Some just weren't aware these new programs even existed.
Yeah.
Others looked into it and found the whole application process just seemed problematic.
Problematic how? Like too confusing or?
Confusing, yeah, or unclear requirements. They felt it wasn't worth the hassle. And for some, the specific data on offer just wasn't what they needed for their research anyway.
Okay, but let's talk about those who did try. What were the main headaches they ran into with the applications, especially for, say, Meta's content library or X?
Oh, the big themes were definitely how cumbersome and frankly opaque the processes were. Researchers mentioned applications taking a huge amount of time, the requirements being really unclear or overly complicated.
And expensive sometimes? Or was it more the time cost?
It was mostly the time and effort, though sometimes other costs crept in. But yeah, time-consuming, unclear, just generally frustrating seemed to be the main takeaways for Meta and X specifically.
And the study highlighted a difference between applying for just one project versus, like, ongoing lab access.
Absolutely. That was a real sticking point. One researcher running a big lab said having to apply separately for every single research question makes it very, very cumbersome for a lab like us.
Yeah, I can see that. Research isn't usually just one-offs.
Exactly. Their point was it's just very limiting and doesn't fit how research labs actually operate with multiple people working on multiple things. The platform setups just weren't practical for that reality.
Okay, let's get specific. What requirements really tripped researchers up? That initial IRB approval thing for Meta sounded like a big one.
Oh yeah, the Institutional Review Board approval. Initially, Meta demanded that right up front for the content library. and researchers pushed back hard.
Why was that so bad? Isn't ethical review standard?
It is, but when you get it matters. One researcher called it a very limiting thing because often in social science you need to explore the data a bit first to even finalize your research design.
Yeah.
Requiring full IRB approval before you even see anything just felt backwards and restrictive to that iterative process. It hindered independence.
Right, the data collection and the research design often influence each other.
Exactly.
And this was even tougher for researchers outside the US.
Definitely. Ethical review systems just aren't the same everywhere. A European political communication researcher pointed out that formal ethics committees like IRBs are not really common in social science in many European universities.
So a US-centric requirement created a barrier for international researchers studying their own regions.
Precisely.
Okay, beyond IRB, what else? You mentioned the sheer number of questions, like 40 for LinkedIn. That sounds intense.
It is. And researchers felt the criteria were sometimes just unrealistic,
Yeah.
especially for public data. Someone from a European civil society group applying for LinkedIn felt the requirements around safety, security, privacy are absolutely disproportionate to the sensitivity of the public data.
Like overkill for data that's already out there.
Kind of, yeah. Their feeling was that almost no organizations could realistically meet all those criteria. The bar just seemed incredibly high.
So you're jumping through all these hoops. And even if the forms were clear, the time it took was still a major issue.
Oh, absolutely. Even if the application itself was pretty clear and straightforward, as one person put it, just filling it out took ages. It slowed everything down.
And then you wait.
And you wait.
Yeah.
Weeks, sometimes months, just to hear anything back. That kind of delay can completely derail a research project.
And it wasn't just the forms, right? There were legal agreements too, with Meta, for instance.
Yeah, that was another layer. For Meta, researchers mentioned these complex legal agreements that needed university lawyers to get involved, going back and forth with Meta's lawyers. That could drag on for weeks or months, too.
Wow. So layer upon layer of delays and hurdles.
Pretty much.
So after all that effort, what happened? Did people actually get access? The survey data sounded a bit grim, lots pending, lots rejected.
Yeah, the numbers weren't great. A lot of applications were just stuck in limbo, still pending when the survey was done. And for X and TikTok especially, a fair number got flat out rejected.
And the interviews really brought out the frustration of those rejections, didn't they? Particularly with X, it sounds like people were just told no with no real explanation.
Exactly. Often just a vague, doesn't meet DSA criteria. No specifics on what criteria or how to fix it. One researcher studying climate stuff, who used to have Twitter access, got denied the new X access and said, obviously it felt like an injustice has been done.
Creates a real sense of unfairness, I bet.
And powerlessness.
And no way to appeal. If you get denied, that's it.
Seems like it. A hate speech researcher specifically said there was just no process to contest a denial. It's a black box. Apply, wait, get rejected, end of story, no feedback loop.
And maybe even worse than a no is just silence, like with the Reddit API.
Yeah, that's incredibly frustrating too, just being left hanging. One scholar applied for Reddit's API in 2023 and just never heard anything back. And apparently that wasn't unique to me. Other colleagues had the same experience.
Yeah.
Another person only found out their Reddit application was rejected because someone mentioned it informally at a workshop. Just a total lack of communication.
That's just unprofessional, really. And it sounds like if you weren't at a university, getting access was even harder.
Oh, definitely. That's a huge issue. TikTok, for example, was apparently only giving API access to academic researchers, explicitly excluding others.
But doesn't the DSA say researchers approved by national authorities should get access, regardless of where they work?
It does. But TikTok seemed to be ignoring that. One researcher from a publicly funded European institute, not a university, got denied by TikTok because they weren't a university, even though their country's digital service coordinator said they should be eligible.
So a direct conflict with the regulation.
Yeah, one interviewee called it a clear mismatch between what they offer and what the law says they have to offer under the DSA.
And that exclusion hits civil society groups particularly hard, right? The person from the Latin American organization made a really strong point about that.
They really did. They stressed the critical role these organizations play, especially in spotting risks for vulnerable communities. Limiting access just to academics, they argued, undermines the whole point of the DSA, which is about broader oversight and understanding.
Okay, so let's say a researcher actually does manage to run this gauntlet, jumps through all the hoops, gets the green light, access granted. Is it smooth sailing then?
Unfortunately, no, not according to this study. Getting access was often just the start of a whole new set of problems related to actually using the data.
So access granted, but the data's flawed or hard to get.
Both, often. Researchers hit roadblocks trying to collect the data and then found issues with the data itself.
Okay, let's break that down. Difficulty collecting data first. TikTok's API sounds like it was a bit of a nightmare.
Yeah, poor usability was a common description. Frequent server errors, failed downloads. Researchers said a lot of their attempts just didn't work.
Errors like what?
Things like getting too many requests errors, even when they weren't hitting limits, or problems with how the data was structured for download, pagination issues. Someone mentioned the theoretical limit was 100,000 videos a day, but they never even remotely reached that number.
So the potential was there, but the reality wasn't.
Exactly. Another just called it not a very good quality product, meaning multiple tries just to get a small bit of data. Super inefficient.
And was it just TikTok, or did other platforms have usability issues too? Meta's content library?
Meta had its own problems, described as barely usable by some, not working as the documentation claimed. Plus, just getting into it sounded like a pain. VPNs, multiple multi-factor authentications, virtual environments.
Sounds like they were trying to make it difficult.
Well, one researcher put it bluntly, I don't think anyone is actually using it. The feeling was the system prioritized locking data down over enabling research.
Okay, so collecting is hard. Then there are data caps, limits on how much you can get.
Yep, restrictive caps were another major complaint. Meta's 100,000 records at a time limit. Just not enough for proper big data analysis, researchers said.
Right, that sounds quite small for platform-level trends.
And TikTok had really strict rate limits, making it hard even to get data from just a few thousand accounts in a decent time frame.
And for labs doing multiple projects.
A big problem there, too. Some platforms had single quota limits for a whole lab. So you'd need an agreement so that only one particular project can use the API at any given time. That really slows down a lab's overall work.
And it wasn't just the amount of data, but the type of data fields available, right? Especially for EU researchers using Meta.
Exactly. EU researchers found they couldn't get certain info from Facebook pages with fewer than, I think, 15,000 followers.
Sure.
Or public profiles under 25,000.
That seems arbitrary.
Well, researchers from smaller EU countries called it a very high bar. They felt the thresholds were based on U.S. standards and just didn't work for studying smaller populations or national contexts. And there was a broader feeling that platforms were building tools for, like last year's research questions, limiting access to fields that might be needed for new kinds of inquiry. As someone said, the bureaucracy is not serving the science.
So you fight to get access, struggle to download the data, find it's limited in scope or amount, and then the quality itself might be dodgy. You mentioned TikTok again.
Yeah, data quality was another concern, especially with TikTok. Researchers reported inaccuracies, inconsistencies, like missing bits of data or weird discrepancies in video transcripts provided by the API.
How did they know it was inaccurate?
By comparing it. One person compared API data to data from a paid third-party tool and found differences. Another manually checked a politician's TikTok post collected via API against what was actually on the app and got different results each time.
That's worrying.
Yeah, they concluded there's something weird happening with the API and it doesn't give consistent results.
It really paints a picture of platforms maybe just ticking a box, saying they offer access, but not really committing to making it work well for research.
That suspicion definitely came through. One interviewee said they suspected platforms felt obliged to offer something, but the quality wasn't regulated. So maybe they thought, this is the bare minimum of what they can provide. It really breeds distrust.
Given all that, it's no wonder researchers are looking elsewhere. Web scraping came up a lot.
Yeah, scraping was mentioned frequently as a kind of necessary evil, an unofficial workaround when APIs are blocked or unusable.
But scraping has its own issues, right? Legally, ethically.
Big time. Researchers know the limitations. You might miss data. Getting historical data is hard. And while some platforms like Google for YouTube sometimes allow scraping under specific rules, it's often against terms of service.
That quote about scraping is not a crime, but it does go against the terms, really captures that tightrope walk.
It really does. And platforms can actively fight scrapers, making it unreliable, especially for tracking things over time. Some researchers try to mitigate risks by scraping aggregate data, not individual user stuff.
What else besides scraping? Third-party tools? Data archives?
Yeah, those are options too. But third-party tools cost money, might not cover everything, and you depend on them. Existing archives might not be current or comprehensive enough. Plus, these often need specific coding skills.
So the worry is that important research just isn't happening.
That's the core concern. Without reliable and equitably accessible tools, as one researcher put it, and with alternatives being less systematic, some crucial questions just aren't getting investigated properly.
Let's circle back to the DSA then. It was meant to be the solution, or part of it. How are researchers feeling about its impact now? Still hopeful.
There's still maybe some cautious optimism. The hope rests on these digital service coordinators, the DSCs in each country. The idea is they can act as a neutral third party, ensuring platforms grant access fairly, not just based on their own interests.
So taking the decision out of the platform's hands, essentially.
That's the hope.
But that optimism is clashing with the reality of still getting rejected, still facing these hurdles, even with the DSA in place.
Right. The frustration is still there. One person pointed out that even application forms can be subtly different, the wording and context, between the US and Europe, potentially disadvantaging EU researchers trying to use the DSA framework.
And while the DSA is EU law, it could benefit researchers elsewhere. But there's a risk of widening the gap, too, between global north and south, academia, and civil society.
That's a huge concern. If DSA implementation mainly benefits well-resourced researchers in Europe or North America, it could actually make existing inequities worse, leaving crucial research in other regions or by vital civil society groups further behind.
Looking ahead, though, could this difficult situation be maybe an inflection point, a chance to rethink research approaches?
Some researchers see it that way. Maybe it forces a diversification beyond the usual suspects like old Twitter, where data was easy. Perhaps researchers now need to ask, what platform should we be looking at? Maybe exploring newer or niche platforms.
A bright side of sorts, and maybe more focus on small data, qualitative work.
Potentially, yeah. More in-depth analysis in specific context.
But the need for pressure, for policy action to get better access, that hasn't gone away.
Not at all. Researchers stress the need for collective action, for holding platforms accountable. And they worry that platforms might use valid concerns like privacy or data minimization as an excuse to restrict legitimate research even further.
So the call is for platforms to genuinely make independent research possible within the regulatory framework.
Exactly. And for a strong community of scholars and projects to push for that change together.
And what specific kinds of data access are researchers really asking for? What's on the wish list?
Top of the list. Readily available public data, especially for public figures. Something like the old Twitter API, giving access to all public posts and interactions over time for an account. The argument is that's basically public domain.
Makes sense. What else?
Larger scale data is crucial for trends, platform-wide stuff. Researchers know that without APIs, I'm never going to be able to create very big data sets for that kind of work, like analyzing TikTok remixes at scale.
And specific data points, too, like for TikTok.
Yeah, things like visual captions on videos, who is commenting for network analysis, and just getting all the posts from an account historically.
It really comes back to that core tension, doesn't it? Needing the platform data for good research, but wanting independence from the platforms controlling that data.
Precisely. How do you get the access needed to study these powerful entities and hold them accountable without being totally dependent on their terms and their often flawed systems? That's the challenge.
So wrapping up our deep dive today, it's pretty clear the promises of this post-API age, spurred by the DSA, well, they haven't fully materialized for many researchers yet.
No, we've heard about these really tangled application processes, murky decisions, APIs that are just difficult or impossible to use reliably, and serious limits on the data itself.
Yeah, it's not the open landscape some might have hoped for.
And these aren't just academic problems. These challenges matter for anyone concerned about, the health of online discussion, our digital public sphere, and whether we can actually understand and scrutinize the platforms shaping so much of modern life.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, our listener. With all these obstacles, what is the future for independent research on these incredibly influential platforms? Can rules like the DSA really close that gap between the data haves and have-nots?
And maybe, what role do we as users have in all this? It definitely leaves us with a lot to chew on.
It certainly does. We encourage you to think about these implications. Maybe check out some of the resources from the study itself if you want to dig even deeper into this really complex and evolving situation.